You're a disgrace to the Sterling name. Don't ever come back. My father's words shattered my world like glass hitting concrete. I was 26 years old, standing in the marble foyer of Sterling Industries headquarters, still wearing my MIT graduation gown from the ceremony he'd refused to attend. The security guards flanked me like I was a common criminal, waiting to escort me from the building that bore my family's name. My name is Victoria Sterling, and 8 years ago I was cast out of my family like a diseased animal. Today, at 34, I am the youngest female CEO to crack the Fortune 100, worth more than my father ever dreamed of being. But before I tell you about my triumph, let me tell you about my destruction. If you've ever been betrayed by those you loved most, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're ready to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of manipulation. It started with my radical idea that Sterling Industries should develop affordable medical devices for poor countries instead of just catering to wealthy hospitals. I'd spent 2 years at MIT developing revolutionary diagnostic technology that could save millions of lives while generating billions in revenue. I was naive enough to believe my family would care about both. "This is exactly why you don't belong here," my brother Alexander had sneered during that final board meeting, his perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table. "You're too soft, too emotional. You think business is some kind of charity work." "Emotional?" I'd shot back. "I'm talking about a $40 billion market opportunity." "Enough." My father's voice had cut through the boardroom like a blade. "Victoria, you clearly don't understand what Sterling Industries represents. We serve elite clientele, not third-world charity cases. If you can't grasp that basic concept, perhaps this company isn't the right fit for you." The 12 board members, all men over 50, all looking at me like I was an embarrassing child having a tantrum, nodded their agreement. My own Uncle Richard, who had taught me to ride bikes and helped with my science projects, wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Fine," I'd said, standing and gathering my presentation materials. "But when companies are making fortunes off the ideas you're rejecting today, remember this moment." That's when Alexander delivered the killing blow. "Victoria, we've all discussed this. Your ideas are impractical. Idealistic. Maybe you'd be happier teaching at some community college or working for one of those feel-good nonprofits. The real business world clearly isn't for you." The laughter that followed, quiet, condescending chuckles from men who'd never had an original thought in their lives, still echoed in my nightmares. But it wasn't just the business rejection that destroyed me. It was what came after. Within 24 hours, my access to Sterling Industries was revoked. Within a week, my trust fund was frozen pending review of my commitment to family values. Within a month, I was blacklisted from every major investor in Boston because my father had made it clear that Victoria Sterling was unreliable and emotionally unstable. The worst part came at Christmas dinner 3 months later. I'd swallowed my pride and attended, hoping time had softened their position. Instead, I walked into a room full of extended family, business associates, and Sterling Industries executives. My father had stood to make his annual toast, wine glass gleaming in the chandelier light. "To the Sterling legacy," he'd announced, "and to those who have the strength and vision to carry it forward." Then he'd look directly at me. "And to those who don't, may they find happiness in simpler pursuits." The room had erupted in uncomfortable laughter. My cousin Marcus, who I'd grown up with, who I'd considered my best friend, actually snickered. My mother, who'd been fighting depression for years, stared into her wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. But it was Alexander who delivered the final humiliation. He'd stood up, raising his glass with a cruel smile. "To my sister Victoria," he'd announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "who proves that not everyone is cut out for excellence. May she find fulfillment in whatever small endeavors suit her, limited capabilities." The toast that followed, dozens of glasses raised while I sat there, dying inside, was the sound of my family publicly burying me alive. I'd walked out that night and never returned. For 3 years I lived like a ghost. I ate ramen noodles in a studio apartment with broken heating, working 3 part-time jobs to pay for the tiny lab space where I developed my technology. I wore the same interview suit until it literally fell apart. I was rejected by 63 investors before finding one willing to take a chance on Charles Sterling's failure of a daughter. My mother stopped taking my calls. Alexander told people I'd had a breakdown and was getting help. My father made sure everyone in Boston's business community knew that Victoria Sterling was no longer part of the family and certainly not someone worth doing business with. They tried to erase me completely. What they didn't count on was my fury. Every rejection, every humiliation, every night I fell asleep hungry because I'd spent my last $5 on lab equipment instead of food, it all became fuel. I worked 18-hour days, slept 4 hours a night, and lived on coffee and determination. And slowly, quietly, while they were busy congratulating themselves on removing the weak link from their perfect family chain, I built an empire. Meridian Tech started in that freezing basement lab. 8 years later, it's worth $4 billion. My diagnostic devices are used in 47 countries. The emotionally unstable ideas they'd mocked now save 12,000 lives every month. The technology one developed has been featured on the cover of Time magazine. I've been keynote speaker at 3 World Health Organization summits. Harvard Business School teaches case studies based on my radical approach to humanitarian capitalism. And my family? Sterling Industries has been bleeding market share for 5 consecutive years, losing ground to companies doing exactly what I'd proposed, serving the global health market they'd been too proud to touch. The beautiful irony is that they've been forced to watch my rise from the sidelines, unable to claim any credit for my success since they'd so publicly disowned me. Every award I won, every deal I closed, every magazine cover I graced was another reminder of their catastrophic error in judgment. But I haven't spoken to any of them in 8 years. Not until yesterday, when a cream-colored envelope appeared on my desk with the Sterling family crest, a phoenix rising from flames. How perfectly ironic. Inside was an invitation to my brother Alexander's engagement party, along with a small handwritten note from my mother. "Victoria, please come. It's time. We need to talk. Love, Mother." 8 years of silence, and now they wanted to talk. I should have thrown it away. I should have continued my policy of pretending they didn't exist, just as they pretended I didn't exist. Instead, I found myself researching Alexander's fiancée. Sophia Hartwell, daughter of pharmaceutical royalty, Harvard MBA, surprisingly accomplished in her own right. And here's what made me laugh. According to her LinkedIn profile, she'd spent 2 years working for global health initiatives, using the exact kind of technology Sterling Industries had rejected as impractical charity work. The same technology I built my empire on. The same technology that made me richer and more successful than any Sterling in the family's 100-year history. Oh, this was going to be interesting. I looked at my reflection in my office window, designer suit, perfect makeup, the kind of confidence that comes from proving everyone wrong. The scared, humiliated girl who'd been cast out 8 years ago was gone. In her place stood Victoria Sterling, CEO, innovator, the woman who'd turned their cruelest rejection into her greatest triumph. They wanted to talk? Fine. Let's talk. But this time I'd be speaking from a position of power they couldn't take away, couldn't diminish, and couldn't pretend didn't exist. This time the last word would be mine. I called my assistant Jennifer into my office and handed her the invitation. "Clear my schedule for Saturday evening. I'll be attending a family function." Jennifer's eyebrows shot up. In 5 years of working for me, she'd never heard me mention family, let alone attending their events. "Shall I arrange security?" "Transportation." "No security needed. But arrange for the Bentley and make sure Marcus knows to wait. This might be a short visit." That evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment overlooking Boston Harbor, holding a glass of wine that cost more than my family had allowed me to live on during my worst month 8 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I pulled out my laptop and did what I always did before important meetings, research. Not just on Sophia Hartwell, but on my entire family's recent activities. What I found was fascinating and pathetic in equal measure. Sterling Industries stock had dropped 23% in the last 18 months. They'd lost two major contracts to companies using technology similar to mine. My brother Alexander, now 36, had finally made senior vice president, but only after their previous VP had been poached by a competitor using Meridian Tech devices exclusively. My father, Charles Sterling, had been forced to step back from day-to-day operations due to stress-related heart problems. The man who'd called me too emotional to handle business pressure had literally worked himself into cardiac episodes trying to save a company that was becoming increasingly irrelevant. But the most interesting discovery was about Sophia Hartwell herself. She wasn't just some society princess Alexander had collected to enhance his image. She had an MBA from Harvard, had spent 2 years with Doctors Without Borders, and currently ran a global health nonprofit that had, according to their website, partnered with innovative technology companies to bring diagnostic capabilities to underserved populations worldwide. In other words, she was doing exactly what I'd proposed to Sterling Industries 8 years ago, using exactly the kind of technology they'd rejected as charity work. And now she was engaged to my brother, who had personally humiliated me for suggesting such impractical ideas. I spent the next hour looking through photos from Sophia's nonprofit work. There she was in Guatemala, supervising the installation of medical equipment in a rural clinic. There she was in Kenya, training local healthcare workers on diagnostic procedures. And there I nearly spit out my wine. There she was in Bangladesh, standing next to a Meridian Tech diagnostic station that bore my company's logo. Sophia Hartwell had been using my technology for years. She knew my work, had probably studied my innovations, might even have read the papers I'd published on sustainable healthcare business models. And she had no idea that the CEO of Meridian Tech was her fiancée's failed sister. This was getting more interesting by the minute. I picked up my phone and called my head of marketing. David, I need you to compile a portfolio of every major project Meridian Tech has completed in the last 5 years. Photos, impact statistics, media coverage, the works. I want it bound professionally and ready by Friday afternoon. Of course, Ms. Sterling. May I ask what this is for? Let's call it a family reunion gift. Friday morning brought an unexpected phone call. My assistant buzzed me with obvious confusion. Ms. Sterling, there's a Charles Sterling on line 1. He says he's your father. I hadn't heard my father's voice in 8 years. For a moment, I considered having Jennifer tell him I was unavailable. Then my curiosity got the better of me. Victoria. His voice was older, more strained than I remembered. I understand you received Alexander's invitation. I did. And are you planning to attend? I let the silence stretch, enjoying the fact that he was the one calling me, the one asking for information. Why do you care? Because. He paused, and I heard something I'd never heard before in Charles Sterling's voice, uncertainty. Because there are things that need to be said. Things that should have been said years ago. Really? Like what? Like how I was too emotional for business. Too idealistic? How my ideas were impractical charity work. I kept my voice level professional. Because I remember those conversations quite clearly. Victoria, we both know that you've exceeded expectations in your career. Perhaps it's time we discussed. Exceeded expectations? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Father, I've built a company worth more than Sterling Industries ever was. I've revolutionized an entire industry. I've been featured on more magazine covers than you have in your entire career. So when you say I've exceeded expectations, whose expectations are we talking about? Because mine were always higher than yours. The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. Will you come to the party? He asked finally. Oh, I'll be there, I said. But not for you. I'm curious to meet the woman who's building her career on the ideas you rejected. The woman who's accomplished more in humanitarian business than Sterling Industries has in its entire history. I hung up before he could respond. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Connecticut. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a midnight blue silk dress by Valentino that had cost more than some people's annual salary, paired with the diamond necklace I'd bought myself after my first billion-dollar quarter. My hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, and I wore the kind of makeup that whispered expensive rather than shouting it. But the real statement piece was the portfolio I carried, leather-bound documentation of everything Meridian Tech had accomplished. Every life saved, every innovation created, every dollar earned through the impractical approach they'd mocked. As my Bentley pulled through the gates of the Sterling estate, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that always accompanied visits to this place. The house looked exactly the same, imposing, pristine, and cold as marble. Just like the family that lived in it. Cars lined the circular driveway. BMWs, Mercedes, the occasional Tesla. I recognized several license plates belonging to Boston's business elite, people who had once dismissed me as Charles Sterling's disappointment and now competed with my company for market share. Perfect. An audience. I checked my reflection one final time in the Bentley's window. The scared 26-year-old who'd been cast out of this house was gone. In her place stood Victoria Sterling, CEO, worth $2.3 billion personally, more successful than any Sterling had ever dreamed of being. Time to remind them what they'd thrown away. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. My mother stood there, looking elegant in champagne silk but older than her 62 years. Elizabeth Sterling had always been beautiful, but 8 years of watching her daughter's exile had left lines around her eyes that no amount of expensive skincare could erase. "Victoria," she breathed, her eyes immediately filling with tears. "Oh, my darling, you came." The hug she gave me was desperate, clinging, full of 8 years of regret and missed opportunities. When she pulled back, her hands remained on my shoulders as if afraid I might disappear. "You look magnificent," she whispered. "Absolutely magnificent. I've been following your career, you know. Every article, every interview. I'm so proud of you." "Are you?" I asked quietly. "Because your silence for 8 years suggested otherwise." Her face crumpled slightly. I know, and I have no excuse except cowardice. I chose my marriage over my daughter, and I've regretted it every single day since." Before I could respond, a familiar voice called from behind her. "Victoria? My God, is that really you?" My cousin Marcus appeared, looking every inch the successful Sterling Industries executive in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He'd put on weight since I'd last seen him, and his hairline had receded considerably, but his smile was the same one I remembered from childhood. Until he got close enough to really look at me. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, his eyes widening as he took in the designer dress, the jewelry, the unmistakable aura of serious wealth. "You look like you could buy and sell this whole party." "Funny you should mention that," I said with a slight smile. "I probably could." Marcus laughed nervously. "Right. Well, this is unexpected. Does Uncle Charles know you're here?" "Not yet," my mother said quickly. "He's in the study with some business associates. Alexander and Sophia are in the garden with the other guests." "Sophia doesn't know who I am, does she?" I asked. Marcus shook his head. "Alexander told her you were, well, that you'd had some kind of breakdown after college and weren't really part of the family anymore. He said you worked for some small nonprofit somewhere." I felt that familiar surge of rage, carefully controlled and channeled into steel-cold determination. A breakdown. How interesting. And what exactly did he say I was doing with my life? "Something about teaching or social work," Marcus said uncomfortably. He was always vague about it. Said it was too painful for the family to discuss. "Too painful," I repeated. "Yes, I imagine it would be painful to explain that the sister you publicly humiliated for being too idealistic went on to build a business empire using exactly the ideas you mocked." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Victoria, we didn't know." "Didn't know what?" "That I was successful? That I was worth billions? That the technology you all dismissed as charity work now dominates the global healthcare market?" I smiled, and it wasn't warm. Or did you not know because you never bothered to check? Because acknowledging my existence might have meant admitting you were wrong. My mother stepped between us before Marcus could respond. Victoria, please. I know you have every right to be angry. Angry? I laughed. Mother, I'm not angry. Anger is for people who still care what you think. I'm curious. Curious to see how you'll all react when you realize what you threw away. I gestured toward the sound of laughter and conversation coming from the garden. Shall we go meet the happy couple? I'm particularly interested in meeting Sophia. From what I've read, she's doing remarkable work in global health. The kind of work Sterling Industries used to consider beneath them. Marcus and my mother exchanged worried glances, but I was already walking toward the garden, my portfolio tucked under my arm like a weapon. The garden was magnificent, transformed with thousands of fairy lights and elegant floral arrangements. At least 200 guests mingled on the manicured lawn, champagne glasses catching the light as conversations flowed around strategically placed cocktail tables. I spotted Alexander immediately. At 36, he was still handsome in that carefully maintained way that came from good genetics and better personal trainers. He stood near the center of the party, surrounded by admirers, telling what appeared to be an amusing story based on the laughter it was generating. And beside him stood Sophia Hartwell. She was beautiful, certainly, but not in the artificial way I'd expected. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore a classic white dress that was elegant without being flashy. But what struck me most was her posture, confident without being arrogant, engaged without being performative. As I watched, she excused herself from Alexander's group and walked over to speak with an elderly gentleman who was standing alone near the fountain. She spent several minutes with him, clearly listening more than talking, making sure he felt included in the celebration. Interesting. Either she was an exceptional actress, or there was more substance to her than I'd expected. Victoria Sterling, as I live and breathe. I turned to find Jonathan Pemberton, senior partner at one of Boston's most prestigious law firms and a longtime Sterling Industries board member. He was staring at me with undisguised amazement. Jonathan, I said smoothly. How lovely to see you. My dear, you look absolutely stunning. I had no idea you'd be here tonight. His eyes took in my appearance with professional assessment. I've been following your remarkable success, of course. Meridian Tech is quite the achievement. Thank you. And how is Sterling Industries faring these days? His smile became slightly strained. Oh, you know how it is. Challenging market conditions, increased competition. He trailed off, perhaps realizing he was describing the exact challenges my impractical ideas could have helped them avoid. Yes, I said with mock sympathy. I imagine it must be difficult watching competitors capture market share with innovative approaches, particularly when those approaches were available to you years ago. Jonathan's face flushed slightly. Victoria, about that board meeting. Water under the bridge, I interrupted pleasantly. Though I do appreciate the irony. Tell me, has Sterling Industries reconsidered its position on emerging markets? Or are you still focused exclusively on elite clientele? Before he could answer, a ripple of attention moved through the crowd near us. Alexander had spotted me. For a moment, my brother froze completely, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. I watched the blood drain from his face as he took in my appearance, the obvious wealth, the unmistakable confidence, the portfolio under my arm that suggested this wasn't a social call. Then his expression shifted to something between panic and rage. Excuse me, he said abruptly to his companions and began walking toward me with determined strides. This was it. 8 years of silence, 8 years of humiliation, 8 years of being written off as the family failure were about to come to an end. I set down my champagne glass and smiled. Let the reckoning begin. Victoria. Alexander's voice carried across the garden as he approached, loud enough that conversations around us began to quiet. This is unexpected. Hello, Alexander, I replied calmly. Congratulations on your engagement. Though I have to say, I'm surprised you found someone willing to marry into a family with such interesting dynamics. His jaw tightened. What are you doing here? I was invited. By our mother, in case you were wondering. Apparently, some members of this family still remember I exist. Alexander glanced around nervously, clearly aware that we were attracting attention. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. Privately? I laughed. Like the way you privately told your fiancé that I was a failure who'd had a breakdown? Or the way you privately toasted my limitations at Christmas dinner 8 years ago? Sophia, who had been approaching with a welcoming smile, stopped short as she heard my words. Her eyes moved between Alexander and me, clearly trying to piece together the situation. I'm sorry, she said politely. I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Sophia Hartwell. Victoria Sterling, I replied, extending my hand. Alexander's sister. Sophia's smile faltered as she processed the name. Sister? But Alexander said his sister was. Was what? I asked gently. Please, I'm curious to hear how he's been describing me. Alexander stepped forward quickly. Sophia, this isn't the time or place. No, please, I interrupted, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent garden. I'd love to hear what story you've been telling. Have you mentioned that I'm the CEO of Meridian Tech? Or did you stick with the breakdown narrative? Sophia's face went pale. Meridian Tech? You're the Victoria Sterling who founded Meridian Tech. Guilty as charged, I said with a smile. Though I prefer to think of myself as the Victoria Sterling who your fiancé once publicly humiliated for having impractical ideas about global healthcare. The same Victoria Sterling he dismissed as too emotional for business. The same Victoria Sterling whose technology you've been using for years to save lives around the world. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my father pushing through the crowd, his face a mask of controlled fury. My mother was right behind him, looking terrified. But it was Sophia's reaction that interested me most. She turned to Alexander with an expression of growing horror. You told me your sister worked for some small nonprofit, she said quietly. You said she'd had a breakdown and couldn't handle the pressure of corporate life. You said she'd never accomplished anything significant. Sophia, I can explain. Explain what? Her voice was rising now, carrying to every corner of the garden. That you've been lying to me for 2 years about your own sister? That the woman you described as a failure is actually one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. I opened my portfolio and pulled out a magazine. The cover of Forbes from 6 months earlier, featuring me under the headline The Visionary, How Victoria Sterling Revolutionized Global Healthcare. This might help clarify things, I said, handing it to Sophia. She stared at the cover, then at me, then at Alexander. $4 billion, she read aloud. Youngest female CEO in the Fortune 100. Revolutionary medical technology serving 47 countries. She looked up at Alexander with undisguised disgust. You told me she was working at a homeless shelter. That's enough, my father's voice cut through the crowd as he finally reached us. Victoria, what game are you playing here? Game? I turned to face Charles Sterling, noting how he'd aged in 8 years. His hair was completely gray now, and there were lines around his eyes that suggested stress and sleepless nights. I'm not playing any games, Father. I'm simply correcting some misconceptions about my career trajectory. Your career, he said with familiar disdain, built on technology you developed while working for Sterling Industries. Stop right there, I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. Every patent in my name was filed after I left Sterling Industries. Every innovation I created was developed on my own time, with my own money, in my own lab. Sterling Industries contributed exactly nothing to my success except the motivation that came from being publicly humiliated by my own family. I pulled out another document from my portfolio, a timeline of Meridian Tech's development, complete with dates and patent filings. This shows that every piece of technology Sterling Industries rejected as impractical charity work was developed independently after I was told I wasn't fit to carry the Sterling legacy forward. I looked around at the crowd of business leaders, many of whom were now taking photos with their phones. The same legacy that's been losing market share for 5 consecutive years, while my emotional approach to business has generated $14 billion in revenue. Uncle Richard had appeared at my father's shoulder, looking uncomfortable. Victoria, perhaps we could discuss this inside. Inside? I laughed. Like the way you discussed my future inside that boardroom 8 years ago? When you all agreed that I was too idealistic to understand real business. I turned to address the crowd directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share a little family history with you. 8 years ago, I proposed that Sterling Industries develop affordable medical technology for emerging markets. I presented a business plan showing $40 billion in potential revenue while serving populations that desperately needed access to quality healthcare. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I was told by my father that Sterling Industries served elite clientele, not third-world charity cases. I was told by my brother that I was too emotional and soft to understand real business. I was told by this entire family that my ideas were impractical and that I should consider a career in academia or nonprofit work because the real business world wasn't for me. I gestured to the portfolio in my hands. This documents what happened when I took their advice and left Sterling Industries to pursue those impractical ideas. Meridian Tech now owns 37% of the global diagnostic device market. Our technology is used in hospitals on 6 continents. The World Health Organization has adopted our equipment as their standard for emergency medical response. Someone in the crowd, I think it was Jonathan Pemberton, let out a low whistle. And the best part, I continued, my voice carrying to every corner of the garden, is that Sterling Industries has spent the last 5 years watching their market share erode to companies doing exactly what I proposed 8 years ago. Companies using exactly the technology they rejected as too idealistic. Sophia, who had been staring at the Forbes cover throughout my speech, suddenly spoke up. The diagnostic stations we used in Guatemala. The portable testing equipment in Kenya. The emergency response devices in Haiti. She looked at me with growing amazement. All of that was your technology? Every piece, I confirmed. The same technology your fiancé's family considered beneath them. She turned to Alexander and I saw something die in her eyes. You didn't just lie about your sister's career, Alexander. You lied about her character, her capabilities, her worth as a person. You let me build my entire philanthropic strategy around technology created by the sister you publicly humiliated. Alexander was struggling to find words. Sophia, you have to understand. Understand what? That you're so threatened by your sister's success that you had to pretend she didn't exist? That you're so insecure about your own accomplishments that you had to tear down hers to feel better about yourself. She pulled off her engagement ring and placed it firmly in Alexander's palm. I can't marry someone who would lie about something so fundamental. And I certainly can't marry into a family that would treat their own daughter and sister this way. The gasp that went up from the crowd was audible. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a public dissolution of one of Boston's most anticipated society marriages. Sophia, please. Alexander tried to take her arm, but she stepped away from him. No, Alexander. I've spent 2 years planning a life with someone who doesn't actually exist. The man I thought I was marrying would never lie about his sister's success. He would never participate in casting out a family member for having a conscience. He would never be so threatened by a woman's achievements that he had to diminish them to make himself feel important. She turned to me with obvious admiration. Ms. Sterling, I owe you an enormous apology. I've been using your innovations for years, reading your research, implementing your strategies. You've been my professional hero without my even knowing it. And meanwhile, I was planning to marry the man who tried to destroy your reputation. The irony was so perfect it was almost painful. The woman Alexander had chosen to enhance his own image had built her career on my work, the same work he'd spent 8 years trying to erase from family history. Apology accepted, I said gently. Though I think you should know that your work in global health has been exceptional. You've accomplished more with my technology than Sterling Industries has with their entire medical division." My father, who had been standing frozen throughout this exchange, finally found his voice. "Victoria, you've made your point. Perhaps it's time we discussed this as a family." "Family?" I turned to face him with 8 years of accumulated fury finally showing through my professional composure. "You mean the family that froze my trust fund when I left? The family that blacklisted me from Boston investors? The family that told people I'd had a breakdown rather than admit I was successful?" I looked around at all of them, my father, my brother, my uncle, my cousin Marcus who was hiding in the crowd. "You don't get to call us family now that it's convenient for you. You made your choice 8 years ago when you decided that admitting error was more threatening than losing a daughter." The weight of those words settled over the garden like a heavy blanket. Even the staff had stopped moving, standing frozen as they watched the Sterling family publicly implode. Finally, my mother spoke. "Victoria, you're right. About all of it. We were wrong, we were cruel, and we've spent 8 years paying the price for our pride and our prejudice." She stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "But you're here now and you're magnificent and maybe it's not too late to be the family we should have been from the beginning." I looked at this woman who had birthed me, raised me, and then abandoned me when I needed her most. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to accept the olive branch she was offering. But I wasn't that broken 26-year-old anymore. I was Victoria Sterling, CEO, billionaire, the woman who had built an empire from the ashes of their rejection. "Mother," I said gently, "I stopped needing your approval the day I realized I was stronger without it. I came here tonight not for reconciliation, but for vindication. And I think I've achieved that." I closed my portfolio and prepared to leave. "Sophia, if you're ever interested in discussing real global health initiatives, the kind that change lives and generate sustainable revenue, I'd be happy to continue the conversation. My assistant can arrange a meeting." "I'd like that very much," she said quietly. I nodded to the crowd of stunned guests, many of whom were still recording this entire scene on their phones. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for witnessing tonight's demonstration that success really is the best revenge." As I walked toward the house, leaving my family standing in the wreckage of their perfect society event, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years: complete and total vindication. The scared girl who had been cast out was gone forever. In her place stood Victoria Sterling, triumphant and untouchable. And for the first time since that terrible Christmas dinner, I was genuinely smiling. The headline of the Boston Business Journal read, "Sterling Industries seeks partnership with Meridian Tech after years of family estrangement." The accompanying photo showed me shaking hands with my father outside the Meridian Tech headquarters, both of us smiling for the cameras with the practiced ease of experienced executives. What the photo didn't show was the conversation that had led to that handshake. My father had called 3 months after the engagement party debacle, his voice carrying a humility I'd never heard before. "Victoria, I want to apologize. Formally, completely, without reservation." "For which part?" I'd asked. "The public humiliation? The financial blacklisting? Or the 8 years of pretending I didn't exist?" "All of it," he'd said quietly. "You were right about everything. The global health market, the business potential, the technology. And we were wrong to treat you the way we did." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. And after 8 years of silence, honesty was something I could work with. The partnership we'd eventually negotiated was limited but mutually beneficial. Sterling Industries would manufacture devices designed by Meridian Tech for the North American market, while I retained full control of global operations and all intellectual property rights. More importantly, it came with conditions that would have been unthinkable 8 years ago: a formal public acknowledgement of my contributions to the medical technology field, a written apology for the family's treatment of me, and Alexander's resignation from any role involving strategic planning. My brother had fought that last condition until Sophia made it clear that any hope of reconciliation between them depended on his complete removal from company decisions that might affect my business. She'd kept her word about wanting to discuss real global health initiatives, Our coffee meeting had turned into a consulting contract, then a romantic relationship that surprised us both. "I never expected to fall for the sister of my ex-fiancé," she'd confessed during one of our late-night strategy sessions. But then again, I never expected to discover that the woman I'd been professionally admiring for years was hiding in plain sight. Alexander had handled our relationship about as well as he'd handled everything else in his life, poorly and with maximum drama. But his opinion had stopped mattering to me the moment I'd walked out of that garden party 6 months earlier. The real surprise had been my mother. Elizabeth Sterling had spent the months after the engagement party in intensive therapy, finally confronting the depression and codependency that had allowed her to abandon her daughter for the sake of family peace. She'd emerged transformed, filing for legal separation from my father and moving into her own apartment in Boston's Back Bay. "I spent 30 years being Mrs. Charles Sterling," she'd told me during one of our weekly dinners. "I want to spend whatever time I have left being Elizabeth Sterling, your mother." It was a work in progress, but for the first time in my adult life, I had a relationship with my mother based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. The most satisfying change, however, was what had happened to Sterling Industries itself. The public humiliation of the engagement party had triggered a board revolt that resulted in my father's forced retirement and a complete restructuring of the company's leadership. Uncle Richard, who had finally grown a spine at age 62, had been named interim CEO with a mandate to modernize or face acquisition. Their first decision had been to acquire 3 smaller companies that specialized in, surprise, affordable medical technology for emerging markets. Their second had been to poach 2 of my former employees with offers I didn't bother to match. Their third had been to formally request a meeting with Meridian Tech to discuss strategic partnership opportunities. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a scalpel. But the most poetic justice came from an unexpected source. Jonathan Pemberton, the same board member who had witnessed my public vindication at the engagement party, had quietly approached me about joining Sterling Industries' reconstituted board of directors. "We need someone with vision," he'd said during our lunch meeting. "Someone who understands both innovation and profitability. Someone who won't let pride interfere with good business decisions." I'd turned him down, of course. But not before extracting a formal admission that my original proposal 8 years earlier had been strategically sound and potentially revolutionary. That statement, along with detailed financial projections showing what Sterling Industries had lost by rejecting my ideas, was now part of the public record. Harvard Business School had even reached out about developing a case study on family dynamics in corporate decision-making, using Sterling Industries and Meridian Tech as primary examples. The working title was "When Personal Becomes Professional: How Family Conflict Can Destroy Business Value." I'd agreed to participate, on the condition that Alexander would also be interviewed. I wanted his voice in the record, explaining exactly why he'd felt threatened enough by his sister's success to try to erase it from family history. Today, 6 months after that garden party confrontation, I was sitting in my corner office overlooking Boston Harbor, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed Meridian Tech had captured another 8% of global market share. My company was now worth more than Sterling Industries, Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, and 3 of their major competitors combined. But the numbers, satisfying as they were, weren't what made me smile as I looked out at the harbor. What made me smile was the knowledge that I'd done more than just succeed. I'd redefined what success meant for the Sterling family. The legacy my father had been so desperate to protect was now forever associated with the daughter he'd tried to disown. Every article about Sterling Industries mentioned the Victoria Sterling situation as a cautionary tale about corporate leadership and family dynamics. Every business school case study about innovation and market disruption referenced my technology and my story. They tried to write me out of Sterling family history. Instead, I'd become the most famous Sterling in 4 generations. My assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Sterling, Sophia Hartwell is here for your 2 o'clock. Send her in." Sophia entered wearing a sharp black suit and carrying a portfolio that looked remarkably similar to the one I'd brought to the engagement party. Our relationship had evolved from professional admiration to personal affection to something deeper that we were still defining. "How did the World Health Organization meeting go?" I asked as she settled into the chair across from my desk. "Better than expected," she said with a grin. "They've agreed to fund the expansion project. Full deployment of Meridian Tech diagnostic stations in 37 countries over the next 18 months. It was the largest humanitarian technology contract in history, worth $2.8 billion in revenue while providing life-saving medical capabilities to populations that had never had access to advanced healthcare. There's something else," Sophia continued. "The WHO wants to create a new position, Director of Global Health Innovation. They want someone who understands both the humanitarian mission and the business realities of sustainable development. Sounds like an incredible opportunity for the right person. They want you, Victoria. They want you to lead the entire global initiative." I leaned back in my chair, considering the implications. Leaving Meridian Tech to work for the World Health Organization would mean giving up my CEO position, my board control, my carefully built empire. It would mean trusting others to continue the work I'd started. But it would also mean the chance to save millions of lives on a scale even larger than what I'd already accomplished. It would mean turning my personal vindication into global transformation. "What do you think?" I asked. Sophia smiled, and I saw in her eyes the same passion for meaningful work that had driven me to leave Sterling Industries 8 years earlier. "I think Victoria Sterling, the CEO, has already proven everything she needed to prove. Maybe it's time for Victoria Sterling, the humanitarian, to change the world." Through my office window, I could see the Sterling Industries building in the distance, smaller and less imposing than it had seemed when I was 26. The company that had once seemed like the center of the business universe was now just another mid-tier medical device manufacturer struggling to remain relevant in a market I'd helped create. My grandfather's portrait hung on the wall behind my desk, the only Sterling family heirloom I'd kept. He'd built the family fortune from nothing after losing everything in the 1929 crash, always saying that true strength came from rising above failure rather than avoiding it. I thought he would have approved of what I'd accomplished. Not just the business success, but the way I'd transformed rejection into motivation, humiliation into determination, exile into independence. 8 years ago, my family had cast me out for being too idealistic, too emotional, too unwilling to prioritize profit over principle. Today, those same qualities were being celebrated by the World Health Organization as exactly what global healthcare needed. The scared, humiliated girl who had walked out of this city 8 years earlier was gone forever. In her place stood Victoria Sterling, the woman who had proven that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from fighting your enemies, but from building something so magnificent that their opinions become irrelevant. I looked at Sophia, at the WHO contract on my desk, at the future spreading out before us like an uncharted ocean. "Let's change the world," I said. And for the first time since that terrible Christmas dinner 8 years ago, I was genuinely excited about what came next. 6 months later, Dr. Victoria Sterling was named Director of Global Health Innovation for the World Health Organization. Under her leadership, the organization deployed advanced diagnostic technology to 47 countries, reducing infant mortality rates by 37% and saving an estimated 2.3 million lives in her first year alone. Sterling Industries was acquired by Hartwell Pharmaceuticals 18 months after Victoria's appointment to the WHO, with the acquisition price reflecting the company's diminished market position in the global health sector. Alexander Sterling currently works as a regional sales manager for a mid-tier medical device company. The Harvard Business School case study, "When Personal Becomes Professional, the Sterling Industries Debacle," is now required reading in their MBA program's courses on leadership, family business dynamics, and strategic decision-making. Victoria Sterling's memoir, Rising from Ashes: How Rejection Became My Greatest Gift, spent 43 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and is currently being adapted into a major motion picture. She married Sophia Hartwell in a private ceremony attended by humanitarian leaders from around the world. Notably absent were most members of the Sterling family, though Elizabeth Sterling served as mother of the bride. When asked in interviews about her relationship with her birth family, Victoria Sterling typically responds, "I learned that the family you choose is often more important than the family you're born into. I chose to build something meaningful rather than repair something broken, and that made all the difference." The Sterling family phoenix, once a symbol of rising from flames, now serves as the logo for the Victoria Sterling Foundation for Global Health Innovation, a reminder that sometimes the greatest legacies are built not by honoring tradition, but by having the courage to create something entirely new.